And of course, Oklahoma fans will deliver a little quick hit on Kent State. What do we expect from the Golden Flashes coming off about a 4-touchdown loss against Washington?
Yes, it took a while for Kent State to jumpstart its offense in that game, and it didn't really look as explosive as it did last year with Dustin Crum running the helm. But you can expect a lot of RPO and tempo with Kent State's offense. They run that flash fast scheme where they like to have minimal time between snaps. They like to run a lot of RPOs, spread out the wide receivers to the edges to give more space for the offense to work. So those are some of the things you can expect with Kent State's scheme. Now, their new quarterback, Colin Schlee, he broke in Seattle as a starter for the first time to replace Dustin Crum. He does have some elements of mobility that Crum had at Kent State to his game. He led the team in rushing and was really the only thing going well for Kent State in the run game, though. It wasn't the most accurate showing for him. He did throw 2 interceptions in the game, including one on his first pass as a starter ever, and that kind of put Kent State in an early hole. Kent State's defense didn't do any favors. Kent State's defense was a huge issue last year. They were bottom 10 in points allowed per game, and the 9 teams below them were all 3-9 or worse, while Kent State was appearing in the MAC championship game. So the offense was that good that last year that they had such a terrible defense and were still able to be successful. The defense didn't really show much promise in week 1. I said they allowed points on each of their first 6 defensive possessions. So Washington got 38 points in that span, and the offense just couldn't keep up because it didn't have the explosiveness that it had last year. So it's going to be a bit of a learning curve for Kent State as they enter MAC play. And it's going to be really difficult because Washington is the easiest of their 3 FBS non-conference games, and they lost that by 25. Now they have to go to Oklahoma, and then they're going to have to go to Georgia later on in the season. So that is a brutal non-conference schedule for Kent State. So hopefully for the Golden Flashes, they can come out of this healthy, and they can come out of this as a better team for MAC play like they were last year when they played A&M, Iowa, and Maryland.
Yeah, the Kent State athletic department obviously looked for an opportunity to pick up a few extra bucks to help the department budget going on the road to those 3 locales. But there it is. Steve, in regards to Oklahoma and what you saw out of Dylan Gabriel and the offense and the defense versus Kent State, is there any path to any resistance here in regards to Kent State giving the Sooners a game here?
There shouldn't be much. I was really impressed with Oklahoma's first drive of the game in the first quarter in general. Those just looked like some really good scripted drives out there, and they were really using Dylan Gabriel's strengths to their advantage. I thought Oklahoma did a really good job calling that first quarter offensively. And you saw Gabriel with that first touchdown. He's added a lot more mobility to his game than when he was a true freshman in 2019. So you saw him run that zone read pretty well on that opening drive, and I think that's an element of Oklahoma's offense you might see a lot with him this year. But, yeah, he throws a great deep ball. I think he's going to have a good connection with Marvin Mims. We only saw it a few times last week, but we might not see it much against Kent State. But later on when Big 12 opponents come to play, I think that's going to be one of the most stellar QB receiver connections in the Big 12. And the one other thing I like from Oklahoma was I was on here a few weeks ago. I was saying you lose Nick Benito, you lose Isaiah Thomas. You need somebody who's going to generate your pass rush. And I think we saw Reggie Grimes as that successor to those guys in week 1. So Reggie Grimes, I think, could cause a lot of havoc on that against Kent State's offensive line and provide a lot of pressure, which could make things a little difficult for Colin Schlee and company in this game. As far as a pathway, I don't see much with Kent State. They never really had that game close in the second half against Washington, and I think Oklahoma is far superior to Washington, especially on the offensive side of the ball. You look at the numbers that Michael Penix put up against Kent State as a passer. He was almost immaculate in that game, it felt. So I think that Dylan Gabriel can do even more. In Kent State's secondary, which ranked 116th in defending the pass last year, I think they're going to really struggle in this game, and Oklahoma is going to get an easy victory. And luckily for those in Norman, I think this game's going to be a lot cooler than the one that they were treated to the previous week.
All right, Jason, anything for Steve before we let him go?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's intriguing that I think Oklahoma and Kent State run. It seems to be a very similar offense. To your point, a lot of RPO, a lot of quick, snap the ball very quickly. But just from your perspective, compare Kent State and UTEP a little bit. Which team do you think's maybe a little bit more talented, offense and the defensive side of the ball? Gavin was very, very impressed with his arm strength. Um, I saw it a little bit, against North Texas in the first game of the season, and obviously last year. But just if you would just compare the two, in terms of offense, defense, and just overall, which team do you think is going to have maybe a little bit better of a season than the other one?
I think they could finish around similar records. UTEP is a lot more talented defensively. They have so much more in their front seven than Kent State has to offer when you have guys like Praise Amahule and Jadrian Taylor, who's a stellar pass rush duo in the CUSA, and they have good linebacking talent. Breon Hayward was all CUSA last year. Tyrese Knight is a pretty good tackler too. So I think that UTEP has a lot of guys in their front seven, which are really talented. And Kent State needs better tackling up front. I said they ranked 116th in pass defense last year. They rank also 116th in rush defense. They're returning all the starters basically from last year, so they're just hoping that veteran, more reps under their belt, improves their team. So Kent State's defense didn't really look that great in week one against Washington. If you remember last year, the Huskies offense wasn't really good, but they did get a new coach, a new scheme with Kalen DeBoer. They got a new quarterback in Michael Penix, and Kent State did have a very difficult time stopping that in week one. In terms of offense, Gavin Hardison likes to take a lot of deep shots. He has a pretty talented arm. He's probably the better of the passing quarterbacks, as we haven't seen too much from Colin Schlee yet. We just saw him play a bit in garbage time last year, and we have one sample data point of experience on Schlee as a passer, as a full-time starter. So I would give Hardison the edge in that department. But Kent State has, I think, better skilled position players than UTEP. Last year, Kent State ranked third in rushing, and they returned all three of their main running backs from that rushing attack. Didn't really get established against Washington, but I think when you see Kent State play their FCS opponent and MAC opponents, you're going to see some insane rushing numbers from the Golden Flashes, because their run calling is really creative in their RPO scheme, and they have so many different talented, versatile running backs: Brian Bradford, Marquez Cooper, and Xavier Williams, that can spearhead that rushing attack. Ranked third last year, just behind two service academies. And then you have a wide receiver in Dante Cephas, who had over 1,200 yards last year. Extremely talented. So I think that's one name that Oklahoma is certainly going to have to watch this week is Dante Cephas, who great combination of speed and strength, and has some size too. So I think Kent State has an edge in the skill position players. UTEP more at passing and all around on defense.
Okay.
Steve, how was the LA doubleheader trip, USC, UCLA, and do you have any coverage plans for this weekend?
Yes, the LA trip, I think I executed that as flawlessly as I could have. I stayed 3 quarters at UCLA Bowling Green. I'll be honest, there was a moment in the game where I thought Bowling Green might have a shot to win when it was 17-7. Their defense was rolling, their special teams blocked a punt, recovered a muff punt, and it didn't look like UCLA was going to have the firepower to respond. But then it ended up 45-17. Bowling Green's defense suddenly fell apart, and the heat, which was also a theme in Oklahoma last week, 106 degrees, just caused so many cramping and injuries. But yeah, then I made the trek across town to USC Rice. Rice kept that close, ended up being 66-14 due to an onslaught of pick sixes at the end of the second quarter and the beginning of the third. But that was a cool experience to hit up both of those historic venues in one day. And as far as coverage plans this week, I will be going up to Big Ten country and covering Penn State versus Ohio in Happy Valley.